welcome to this live episode of the FMCG guys from Shoptalk here in Barcelona. I'm accompanied by some very illustrious guests here. Accompanied as always by my co-host, Efrain.
Not so illustrious.
Not so illustrious, Efrain Rosario.
I don't take offense. Don't worry, Daniel. Nice to be with you as always.
Likewise. So we have here with us, as I said, two illustrious guests. We have Jennifer Silverberg on one side and Stijn Demeersseman.
Yeah, spot on. Yeah,
really? Wow.
Yeah.
I pulled it. So I mean, part of the audience will know that both of you, but actually it always helps if you could give us a bit of an idea of who you are. So, Jennifer, Stijn.
All right, Jennifer Silverberg. I am the co-host of CPG Scoop in the U.S., which is a partner podcast to the FMCG guys. So we've known each other a while, but we haven't been on many podcasts together. So this is a big deal. I'm also CEO of SmartCommerce. So I'm here in both capacities to talk about what's going on.
And I think you've missed the most important thing, which is that you're the person that I bump into the most at Shoptalk.
It's uncanny. Every time we go around a corner, there's Daniel. He's either stalking me or there's some strange...
And here in Barcelona, it's been moderate, but in Vegas, which is a huge event, like if you didn't arrange to meet someone, you wouldn't see them. Jennifer and I ran into each other like 8 times, so...
Yeah, every time we turn around.
Yeah, I've bumped into you a couple of times as well these
last
few days, so I think you're everywhere.
Yeah, pretty much.
There might be a couple of times.
Pretty much. I let my hair long as well, so I'm more recognizable.
You're more recognizable, yeah. I've tried that one, but visibly failed.
Yeah. So, Stijn, maybe you can tell the audience a bit about yourself. I mean, people will know you pretty well, I think, from your Procter, L'Oreal, current Amazon days.
Yeah, well, exactly. You've summarized it nicely there. So I'm currently at Amazon. I might retire in Amazon. I say I've started my 3rd decade. So I did about a decade at P&G, then a decade at L'Oreal, and now I'm 3 years at Amazon. Of course, needless to say, very different experiences, very different things you're learning. P&G is more that multifunctional business strategy. You get spoon-fed as of day one. Where L'Oreal will learn you more the art of the beauty industry, more the gut feel. Where Amazon, of course, is very much more than engineering. How do you optimize? How do you make sure that your customer has the best experience? So I like the blend so far, and I try to tap into the best of these 3 worlds.
Yes. Yeah. Speaking about adaptability, like now that you've said it, like I can't imagine like 3 companies that are so different from a company culture point of view. Right. 3 very strong and very distinct cultures as well. So
very different cultures. I think one thing you learn very fast, and I had to learn it going from P&G to L'Oreal, is don't look back. There's a lot you get in your new company, so don't try to say, it was better, no, it's pointless. The only thing you do is actually to frustrate yourself. So, of course, there's many things I miss back from the branded world. It's fantastic if you develop a brand, you see it tangibly on a physical shelf in a store, you touch it, you have certain pride. If it's no Pringles can, or if it was in a Pampers box, or if it was an Ariel or Tide detergent, the pride for what you're doing in Amazon is very different. It's a different pride. And it's not about better or wrong, or you missed it. It's just let's go with the flow, let's learn, and it's a breadth of learning opportunities.
Yeah.
In one of our recent podcasts, we asked somebody how much of your marketing success is art and how much of it is science. And it strikes me that as you name those, the answers would be quite different depending on where you were sitting at the time. You know, and it's very much science, I think, at Procter, and then it moves into maybe a little more art at a company like L'Oreal. What about Amazon?
Data,
right? But that's science. But
but still innovation. I would say yes. I'm working in the retail business, and of course the retail business is a very well, quote-unquote, established business. So there it's indeed probably more scientific already on how do we, I was saying earlier today at Shoptalk, how much stock we buy, when do we buy it, where do we place it in all our distribution centers in Europe, That's of course scientific. The algorithms will do it better than us as human beings. But then there's a component which is the innovation part, which has not been invented yet. There's a lot of the work which is happening in the advertising space today. In our new business units, in the US, of course, Amazon Health is at its infancy. In Europe, not very much present yet, and that's the page is blank. Yeah.
Right.
So there is a bit of of course, there's always science to it. Yes, of course, there's data to it, but probably that piece will not be that significant. So there's a bit of art to it.
It's interesting to watch because even here we had people. I was at a panel talking about retail media networks yesterday. You probably attended as well, and the retailer was saying, "We don't know what we're doing then. Admittedly, we don't know. We're siloed. We have like a buyer that's getting somebody to buy media, but they don't know anything about media, but we're feeling our way." And the brand was saying the same thing. We don't really know how to measure this, and we're feeling our way. So we're all kind of creating art together, I think, as we navigate this.
And it's interesting you mentioned that because one is the brand representative on that panel that I think you're referring to was actually a former colleague of mine back in my big CPG days prior to Diageo. But to that point, what I think was interesting is that several of us in the audience who were fellow brands to Coca-Cola kind of looked at each other and we kind of said, well, if that's what Coca-Cola is experiencing, then what are we? What are we, right? Because we, in essence, I find it, and I was actually mentioning this to a former colleague of mine. I said, when you're at a Procter & Gamble, when you're at Unilever, when you're at a Coca-Cola, you kind of sometimes underestimate, some of how advanced you are in some of these things, and you kind of go, oh gosh, we're so far behind. And I think what's great about this kind of event is that there is some comfort in terms of being able to kind of, in essence, hear from some of the other brands and go, what, we're not alone in this, right? We're all kind of struggling with this, like, having to figure out how to make this all work. And I think a couple of people have mentioned actually the phrase, we're building the plane while we fly kind of mentality. And there is some comfort in hearing that you're not the only one who's going through that kind of situation, right? So, and that's kind of tying back to your point. That's where some of that art and science mix comes in, because you do have to, take some of the years of experience that you've had and start to trust your gut and your intuition in regards to, you don't have to be blatant about it, about saying, when I was at so-and-so, we did it this way, because that can fall on deaf ears and be badly received, but it's being able to kind of use that internally and then be able to act on it. That's my perspective as a brand person in that audience.
Well, I've always found it funny. I'm coming through my SmartCommerce lens now. Literally every time we start with a new brand, it doesn't matter how big they are. You mentioned Coke or anybody, all the way down. Every single time they start with the same apology. They say, we are real, I understand we're really behind. The other CPG companies you worked with, I'm sure that they're far more advanced, they have far more data, they have far more things. And I'm like, literally every single one starts with an apology. You just did the apology, let's push it out of the way. And nobody's behind. They're just all figuring this thing out together. And if you thought you were ahead, then probably the playing field has already moved over there and you're playing a different game. And it's the ones that are always behind and always learning.
Well, and it's interesting to me that I think one of the takeaways that I have from this kind of event is it kind of gives me, in essence, added fuel to experiment, right? Because, like you said, if I wait for it to be absolutely perfect, we'll never move, right? So I think for me, and this is what I've been saying to a lot of the people that I've been meeting with, is that, particularly in a global role like the one that I'm in, a lot of what I do is, in essence, let's do some experiments together, and then we can figure out, if it works, we can iterate and learn, right, from those. And then if it makes sense, then we can codify and quickly scale. So, but I think, like I said, this kind of event gives me, let's call it, some pixie dust in regards to other things that I'm hearing about that other companies are doing that would be interesting for us to kind of go and experiment on. And to maybe kind of flipping it and saying, here's all the reasons that I'm behind. It's saying, well, here are the things that I actually have going for me. Let me go ahead and put those to use and move. Right, let's go.
Yeah, and then spot on, and it's the element which probably was not mentioned a lot over the last days was organizational capability, organizational design, and how do you break down the silos. And of course, it's very difficult to have this conversation because every company is different, but that's still what I see the big enabler to unlock these conversations about when we talk about retail media networks. How many meetings are there with the different experts around the table? The marketing director or the brand director, then the e-commerce or commercial director, then the same equivalent on the other side, so call it Amazon advertising, Amazon retail. 4 people in the room, not just once, but every time. That hardly happens. So then the question is, okay, either you establish it as a new way of working, or you as an individual need to be able to have 2 hats. And that comes into capability building. If there's not many individuals who are able to feel fluent in the digital language and in the commercial go-to-market language. Of course, you need both. Yeah? And that's the element which, for me, if you look at business schools, if you look at capability building organizations, there's a big gap, let's say, in the market on how do you scale, how do you train at scale large organizations, not by one-off projects, yeah? not a typical consulting approach who will help you on this specific. But how do we raise the floor, yeah? raise the floor for the whole organization at scale, the whole industry at scale. So maybe that might trigger an idea for someone, yeah.
Well, exactly, but that's the advantage always of the smaller organization, because you can have everybody literally in a room, and you can spread knowledge very quickly. You can spread excitement, you can spread inspiration, you can spread everything. You can't do that at Amazon. I mean, you are by definition siloed, even if you have these connectors. So it's really interesting, the advantages that you get with scale and the disadvantages you get with scale, and weighing those. It's why I think we have to have companies of all sizes that kind of contribute to this art and science mix.
And I do think, for example, to your point around whether the give and take in regards to large organization and their ability to be maybe as nimble as something like a startup would be. You hear about for example Agile, right? In how do you apply Agile and how do you run Agile, and that makes a lot of sense in a software sense, and there's been a lot of discussion in regards to can you apply some of those same kinds of concepts through a marketing lens as well. And at least what my experience has been thus far, having worked both in startups but also now back in large corporate CPGs, is that it can be extremely difficult, to your point, Jen, around being able to just say, well, we're going to do Agile 100% at a Coca-Cola or a Unilever. Now maybe what you could do instead is try to see how you can apply certain principles, and maybe again doing it in a you kind of crawl, walk, run kind of mentality, which is going 100% Agile at a place with that kind of scale is a large undertaking, and there's a lot of things that you need to have happen in terms of having corporate sponsors, champions, and all these things. But there's certain things that you can do at whatever level you happen to be at any of these organizations to kind of, in essence, at least role model some of those kinds of behaviors, right? In terms of for example, having an experimentation mindset, and thinking about doing retrospectives and just sprints. And I think granted, I've seen that word sprint used very loosely in terms of a sprint shouldn't take you a year. That's kind of the anti-sprint. But anyway, that goes without saying. But I do think that it's hard to go 100% Agile at these larger companies, but there's certain things you can do to kind of get you there, maybe in that crawl, walk, run type of thinking.
And I wish I could remember who it was, but there was someone yesterday who said, we have decided that we're never going to plan more than 3 months out.
Wow, 3 months?
I want to say it was Nestle, 3 months. And they said, that's what we're going to focus on, the next 3 months. And I'm thinking, how does that go with your board? Because, my board wants to see the 3-year plan. How do you say... But I think it makes a lot of sense from the standpoint of you're dealing with the soup of retailers that are changing and consumers that are changing and partners that are changing, and maybe it's a fallacy to think of 9 months. Maybe that's the thing you should have said, 9 months. Maybe we should be planning in these sort of iterative.
That's interesting because that's what they were saying about China a few years
really?
Pre-COVID. They were saying about China that they had to plan month by month because the market was changing so much. So it's interesting, and they attributed that to growth, but maybe it's due to the just changes.
No, and again, the question is indeed back to your question on how do you manage it with your board. I think it's about how can you automate the part which is more the longer term, so the backbone of the organization, make sure that indeed your raw material sourcing and your production planning, etc. Of course, you can operate at a 3 months horizon, but then more the innovative pieces, you can indeed be more flexible, be more dynamic, and so I think that's the beauty then about the interaction between you said this a couple of times here, the robots and the human. So it should be exciting for people to be more on that innovative part, and therefore, maybe more the shorter time horizons where the innovation happens. Now, back to the agile. I agree with you. I've seen multiple tries to get agile working. I think once you're in a hierarchical organization, in terms of design, in terms of decision making, it's very, very difficult. Mm-hmm. If I see, and again, that's where it's fascinating to experience Amazon. It's for me. People say, "Okay, you're learning really e-commerce now at Amazon." I say, not necessarily. Amazon might not be the place to go to learn e-commerce, but it's how do you operate at scale. And for instance, we call it the 2 pizza teams. Yeah? You probably know the concept of 2 pizza teams of our friend Jeff, who said you cannot work on one project or you can't have one meeting with more people than you can feed with 2 pizzas. So I often get the question, okay, what are you doing in Amazon? And it's very difficult to answer the question because I'm part of 10 2 pizza teams. So in one team, that takes 30% of my time, another team, it takes 3% of my time, in another team, I'm working 10% of my time, so, and it's very dynamic, depending on the deadlines of the project. So when there is at one point in time, less bandwidth required on that project, you dial down, you dial up on something else, and then everybody, the whole organization does that. So when I was doing the meetups here today at Shoptalk, I met people in the sustainability area, I met people in the last mile of Israel, I met people in cross-border shipments between Norway and Europe, I met people working in the precision advertising, influencers, and it was actually surprisingly not difficult for me, although I'm not an expert in any of these, to immediately be able to connect these people with the pizza team at Amazon who is working on these specific topics. And I think that network of experts that's very dynamic across the organization is, at least as I have experienced it, agile at its best. And as an individual, as an individual employee, it's also exciting because you can move very quickly, of course not every week, but you can move very dynamically, and therefore your learning curve, your career remains extremely interesting without having to change jobs every week.
Yeah. And as a result, the organization can adapt quicker to change, no, I guess, as well, if you have that type of more dynamic setup.
Yeah. You don't need any big organizational change or research. Yeah.
Interesting. What is there anything? And I can start if you like. Anything that you heard about that kind of like surprised you here? So for me, for example, we watched a presentation yesterday with our good friend Christina Marinucci from Mondelez, where it was all about the metaverse and how brands, in her opinion, brands have to be in the metaverse in some shape or form because that's where the new consumer, metaverse or Web 3, like in video games and stuff like that, because that's where the new consumers will interact with them. So that to me was surprising. I don't know if you guys heard anything that comes to mind that you found interesting or you didn't expect?
No, I think the talk, there were a couple of buzzwords over the last 2 weeks.
AI?
Yes, exactly.
Well, what's that?
But it was clear that AI was kind of, everybody talked it, but everybody's still kind of figuring it out, yes? But the retail marketing was the other big topic, and what I'm still surprised is that the brand side of the table and the retail side of the table still talk today a different language.
Mm-hmm.
Different approaches, different metrics, and retail marketing should bridge that conversation, but it's still very much looked from a financial perspective. About how will this work? Rather than from, okay, let's reinvent how we build brands into a much more dynamic landscape, and we have suddenly an additional channel or 100 additional channels of retail media. And that always surprises me. That it seems to be a very difficult bridge to cross about translating consumer language into shopper language and the other way around.
Yeah. Well, sorry, go ahead, Jen.
No, I was just, because building off what he says, I kind of saw something different than what you saw. Generally speaking, to put a umbrella over it, I'm starting to see kind of a complete redefinition of what a retailer is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think historically we went from a retailer is a place I go to a retailer is a place that I go and that entity also exists online. To what I'm seeing now is the retailer is the bridge between the consumer and the brand, and the retailer can fracture to go to the consumer.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it's a Hotel Hayes, were you in there for their announcement this afternoon?
Yeah.
It was so obvious and blew my mind, which is weird. I should have seen it coming. But, this idea of a retail media product for non-endemic brands, so the brands that they aren't even serving, which essentially makes them an agency. I mean, they're an agency with a lot of eyeballs so that they can leverage. And so at that point, what is the store other than this fractured fulfillment engine, which you've been modeling for a while, but we have these other stores that have still become this, because we're going to other presentations where they talk about merging the in-store and the online experience and bridging it and making sure that it stays, with the guy from Tiffany's and talking about making sure that it stays consistent with the Tiffany experience in-store. All that makes sense, but not in a world where maybe the store is nothing other than the bridge itself. And that's fascinating to me. And to me that feels like it's maybe moving faster than...
I think brands, there was one point in time that brands were actually having the lead in many of the conversations.
Yep.
You do see indeed, to your point, that retailers are very rapidly catching up on understanding audiences, customer behavior.
Right.
Very much so. Yeah.
And I guess as the brand representative in this discussion, I agree with a lot of what you guys both have said in terms of I 100% agree. I think that whether we call it retail marketing, shopper marketing, connected commerce, however you choose to call it, I think we have to get better at being able to speak both the language of brand building and commercial execution. And I think from a retail standpoint, I know some of the discussions that I've been having have been around in some ways thinking about in-store as another form of media, right? So the same way that you would think about a TVC or an out-of-home as being able to drive some form of engagement with a consumer. Think about, for example, if they happen to go into an on-trade establishment and they happen to see some sort of, let's say, something in the bar around your brand, or if they go into a John Lewis or a Printemps in France and they happen to see an amazing iconic display. Obviously, that drives some form of engagement with the consumer in your brand. And ultimately, you want that to hopefully pay off into a conversion. But at the same time, you should understand what is the impact that engagement has with them in terms of how they perceive your brand as well. So I think some of the discussions that I've been having have been around trying to get a little bit more, in essence, the art and science point that we made earlier, kind of in essence, how do we bring those two things together in terms of let's say creative excellence and commercial execution? And then to your point, I thought what was interesting, I think he was former Tiffany's, but he's now the CEO of Printemps, right? The store. Right. But what was interesting to me, and I guess benefiting from living in Paris and having just been to that store 2 weeks ago with some friends who were visiting, is that it is truly an iconic thing. So I understand why he was saying, for them, being able to, in essence, use the store, the physical store, almost like as an asset in and of itself, and getting people who don't have the benefit of being able to physically go to that store and giving them access to that, whether that be through a virtual channel or whether that be through an online channel, makes a lot of sense. Not everybody can do that, right? I mean, there's only one of those kinds of stores anywhere in the world, so I understand that it's a valued asset for them. But you're absolutely right. I think we have to kind of, in essence, start to think about retail, or let's say shopping, as an ambient experience that can happen anytime, anywhere.
Yes.
You no longer have to it's like I have to physically go somewhere to do it. It's like it's always on.
Well, he talked about putting QR codes inside the store for items that they don't carry in the store that bridges to the offline, which is genius. But then taking that QR code to the bus, or taking that QR code into something that's projected on the wall here at this event. Now the store is always, sorry, I'm picking up my phone as something to show. The store is always here. The store, we're in the blurring of I'm in the store, I'm not in the store is ridiculous now. I'm in the store 24/7. But that triggered action that, walking by that display with the QR code can happen anywhere. It doesn't need to be inside that physical space. So what happens when the store completely fractures? And the store is sitting in that corner right now, understanding that you're hungry and showing you a burger. It's really, this is such a fascinating time.
Mm-hmm.
It's redefining everything, I think. And I hope the announcement today really underscored that, at least for me.
You have a 2 p.m., right?
Yeah, but we can keep going a little bit longer. It's okay. This is good for discussion.
Okay. Don't disconnect. Don't go offline the podcast. We'll continue with QR codes. Have been something that I've heard about lately.
Well, it's very funny because QR codes were dead.
Yeah, I know exactly. They were dead on 2015, 2016. It's like that's done.
Thanks COVID.
Yeah.
And now with COVID, they came back.
Yeah.
I mean, they do have a lot of potential at the end.
But it's interesting, right? So it's like. One of our former podcast guests talked about, sometimes it's about, getting the fundamentals right, and they may not be sexy, but, it's more about it in terms of, is it in service or something that you want to try to accomplish, right? So I think QR codes are a great example of that, right? Which is that they met a need that consumers had during COVID, right? Which is that, you couldn't actually get physical menus, right? But you needed to somehow still be able to give people the information. They could figure out what they were going to eat, right?
Well, it just took the friction out of, they could have just put on there, go to, restaurant.com/blank. But you're never going to do that. There's not a trigger. With a QR code, we all know we're supposed to pick up our phone and scan it.
Yeah.
But something sexier, to your point, will replace that.
Oh, sure. I think we've all seen some of that actually, walking the floor, right? Or like you said, having some of these meetups where you start to see some really interesting stuff. Like I had a meetup just earlier today where somebody was showing me some of the virtual shopping environments they're creating for luxury brands, and it's really fascinating to me to kind of see, in essence, in some ways, I went into that conversation thinking, this is about, for example, can we use this kind of technology to create a digital twin of our physical store, so that before we actually go into any physical production of a merchandising asset or a display, if you will, I can kind of, in essence, use this to get internal sell-in, but also buy-in from my customers, from my retailers as well. Whereas, kind of kicking myself that it didn't dawn on me before he said it, but he's like, yeah, but this is also kind of its own experience as well, right? Which is that it doesn't have to ultimately then end in just what you're saying. It's almost like this can in and of itself be an experience that can be fulfilled through D2C, for example, or it can in essence direct you to an Amazon in terms of if you want to go buy this product as well. But it's an experience, right? And it's something that's completely different than what you're actually going to get if you went to the physical store, or if you went into your D2C site. It's something unique, and that to me was really, really exciting, because I didn't think of that going into the discussion, and when he showed me, and I was like, as the light bulb just went off in my head.
Yeah, we do a lot of Amazon. We do a lot of tests and innovation in that space on how do you bridge the virtual world, especially in inspirational categories. You mentioned luxury beauty. Fashion is also one of those verticals that it's more than just a picture and a 360 video that is gonna convince you and convert you. So you do quite a lot of innovation in that space, and beauty. Beauty is one of these fascinating playgrounds with a lot of tech. Hence why a lot of beauty companies reposition themselves as tech companies.
And I would say, your former
exactly
playing ground was a leader in that space.
Yeah. Well, I mentioned earlier today we opened an Amazon salon, a hair salon.
Right.
That was not because Amazon suddenly thought, okay, we're going to launch 1,000 salons all across the world. But we recognize in a category which is that emotional, that you need to have a physical playground to bridge the reality with the physical world and the online world, and we need to test and we need to understand, okay, where are the friction points in the path to purchase and why customers buy and not buy. And that has been very informative to us. Again, you can't open a physical store in every single product category, but it shows that if you have a good collaboration between your brands, you can actually go quite far in the joint innovation you do as a joint industry, I would say.
Yeah, and I think it's always interesting, right? I mean, it's a theme that's been around forever, right? Which is like collaboration, right? Whether it be retailer brand, agency, client. I mean, so for me, like being in these kinds of sessions or these kinds of events, it's always interesting particularly when you've got a panel or a keynote where you've got both. You've got not just one company, but you have companies that have worked together towards that kind of common goal. Those are the ones that I really find really, really inspiring in a lot of ways.
And I want to give a shout out to Shoptalk, by the way, because every panel that I went to had that balance. It had the balance of the collaborative needs among multiple audiences, and so we got to see that. We got to see how did the various pieces work together to create something, and they've done, I think, a fantastic job with that.
Yeah, fully agree. And that's what you hear from many of the participants, and that's the nice blend between one-on-one conversations between retail, between brands, between agencies.
Yeah.
Again, agencies who are well-established, agencies who are just founded. So there's literally a solution for everything.
Yes. Yes.
I'm sometimes thinking how would you start these days to build your own D2C business? You need to invent everything. Actually, it's not true.
No.
A lot of the solutions are here, and
anything that looks like that's the problem with D2C. D2C was, a lot of brands talked about it because they wanted the first party data and everything, but anything that looks like I'm going to go take my toys and play over here isn't good. Mm-hmm. And anything that says, here are my toys, how do I figure it out, and how can you come help me work with it, that's where the traction's happening. And that's, I think, the beauty of this show has been enabling this.
Exactly. I think partnership is definitely one of the takeaways that I have in terms of whether it be like we said, retailer brand, agency client, I think that's key, right? And to be honest, sometimes it's even thinking about partnership with people who you may have thought in the past as being competitors as well. I mean, I think, something that I've kind of taken from this is that there are times when, like you said, sustainability is a great example of that, right? It's like, no one company is going to solve the sustainability challenge. Like, we have to work together towards these kinds of, let's create greater common goals. And like you said, kudos to the Shoptalk organizers, which was one, bringing some of those things to light, but then also making sure that a lot of their sessions and content kind of in essence illustrated that point.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any final thoughts that you would take away from this?
I can't wait till Shoptalk 24.
Thankfully, we'll be back here in Amsterdam, right? That's what they said. So.
Amsterdam?
Sorry, Amsterdam. Sorry. Barcelona. Sorry.
No, I think that's the thing I take away is how can I make sure that it's not just a one-off conversation, but how I can keep some of the ideas, how can I bring them alive when I fly back into London, or how can I keep the conversation with the vendors, the suppliers I work with on a daily basis? How can I trigger it? I actually got already a couple of suppliers who were in the room today texting okay, we heard you and we'll bring it to life. So yeah, but see you latest in Barcelona next year.
Yeah, it's always great to run into all these people in one place with a lot of fun.
I think the weirdest thing for me was I was sitting in one of the panels, and I recalled the very old line from Coke, where it said, that their goal was to have a Coke within arm's reach of everyone, everywhere, worldwide. And we're at a point where, is that Sergio Zeman? God, that way back in my brain somewhere. But we're almost to that point with everything. that everything is going to be within arm's reach of everyone, everywhere, all the time. And there's going to be a whole new set of how is that going to feel to the consumer. Somebody talked about ice cream being an expandable category because when you see it, you want it. And if it's close by, you'll eat it. And if ice cream is always, within arm's reach of everyone, everywhere, all the time, worldwide, what does that do? What does it do when every single thing is within 5 minutes? So it's just understanding that. What does it mean from an infrastructure, sure, and business and everything standpoint, but what does it mean? I get curious about what does that mean from a human standpoint.
What cognitive loads you're going to have.
Exactly. And are we going to start to value curation? Yes. Because we're going to need it because there's a cacophony. So it's going to be really interesting to see if there's weight here, what happens over here. And because everything balances always. So yeah, I think what came out of the show for me is a whole lot of curiosity about, okay, then what's next in this world?
I think just to kind of, in essence, echo a lot of what you guys have already said. I think, for me, it's an interesting time, right? Both from a retail industry standpoint, but also I think if you think about just humankind, and that, one of the things we talk about is that there are few, if none, other times in history where we as a human race have had two crises that have happened in parallel, like what we're going through from a COVID and like an economic cost of living situation that we're doing right now. So I think
there's some wars too on there.
Yeah, that too. Yeah, absolutely. So if you think about it, it's a really interesting time from a consumer behavior standpoint to kind of understand, given these circumstances, how are people going to react, right? How are they going to cope? And I think to your point around, given that everything is within our arm's reach of desires, thank you, Mr. Zeman, I kind of just say, let the consumer guide you, right? I think it's in some ways that's kind of in essence what I keep telling myself is in terms of, a message that Soraya, our Diageo Europe president, mentioned in her keynote, which is, in situations like that, it's maybe better, not more, right? So it's thinking about quality, not quantity. And we're hearing that directly from consumers. So again, let them kind of guide you in regards to, how are they going to kind of navigate? And I think your point around curation is spot on, right? Myself as a consumer, I know that I have that need in terms of it's like almost like the analysis paralysis, right? It's like the paradox of choice is definitely happening when it comes to a lot of categories. So I need to look for trusted sources to kind of help me figure out some of those things, because the one thing that I am sure of